4, 3, 2, 1. We are live. Coming to you live at Lichtman Live. Say what's up to the people, Dad.
Welcome, we hope, to a voice of sanity in these crazy, insane times in which we live, in which we truly live in an Orwellian world, right? Where war is peace, famine is plenty, hate is love. And where America first has suddenly become America last.
Let's first go back 5 years, Dad. Today marks the 5th anniversary of the January 6th United States Capitol attacks. Now, 7 days ago from today, Jack Smith gave damning testimony against President Trump in Congress from his January 6th report. Jack Smith said, under oath, quote, "Our investigation developed proof beyond a reasonable doubt that President Trump engaged in a criminal scheme to overturn the results of the 2020 election and to prevent the lawful transfer of power. This has been almost completely lost in the news cycle with tensions with Venezuela, and because Republicans in Congress scheduled this hearing, guess what? For December 31st, New Year's Eve."
Amazing. The last thing they want you to hear is the truth. We didn't even need Jack Smith's testimony to tell you the truth. I wrote a book called 13 Cracks way back in 2021. And just based on publicly available information, it was crystal clear that Donald Trump was responsible for what was an attempted coup, a violent insurrection, the first of its kind in the nation's capital, designed to overturn a free and fair election, and for the first time in over 200 years of U.S. history, to impede the peaceful transfer of power. It's not just Trump's hour-long plus harangue. You know, he says, I'm exonerated because, in that very long, in speech, inciting the crowd, I inserted a half sentence 20 minutes into the speech, kind of towards the middle, saying, be peaceful. Trump always has an escape hatch, but overwhelmingly 99% of that speech was designed to incite people to riot at the Capitol. And he was doing it long before that. He said, come to the Capitol on January 6th. It's going to be wild. His close cronies signaled the likely violence that would happen on January 6th. Plus, it's not just that. It's all the other efforts to overturn the election that inflamed the people to riot on January 6th. The fake electors, the pressuring of officials to change the votes in their states, the pressuring of state legislatures to rewrite the election laws, and, of course, the pressuring of Mike Pence to break the Constitution and his oath of office and unilaterally change the results of the election. As I point out in my book, I quote John Dean. He was the White House counsel who blew the whistle on Richard Nixon. Insurrections don't take place overnight. They take place over a period of time. And as Jack Smith's testimony makes crystal clear, when you look at the full context, you look at what unfolded over a period of time, as he said it, it is true beyond a reasonable doubt that without Donald Trump's actions, there never would have been that violent insurrection, that attempt to overturn the American government and impede the transfer of power. I believe it was George Orwell who said, whoever controls the past controls the future. And ever since then, Donald Trump has made a concerted and somewhat successful effort to control the past by fabricating, by falsifying in the most gross way what happened on January 6th. Instead of a violent insurrection, the storming of the Capitol, the attack on the Capitol Police, that left over 140 injured, and the riot that indirectly or directly led to several deaths. Somehow, he transformed this into a day of love. If that is love, I'd hate to see what hate and violence is. That these were not people trying to overturn the government or change over 200 years of precedent, but somehow patriots doing the right thing. You know, these were ordinary people. These were not, for the most part, some of them were, the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, hardened criminals, but most of them weren't. But they were influenced, and they all said it. We're here because of Donald Trump. They were influenced by Donald Trump to engage in this violent coup. And most of all, in his efforts to rewrite history and justify what happened, at the very beginning of his second term, what did he do with the Capitol rioters?
He pardoned pretty much all of them, I think.
Pretty much all of them. You know, claiming they were treated unfairly and denied due process. Were they denied due process, Sam?
No, it's all a load of nonsense.
That's utter nonsense. They weren't convicted by Merrick Garland or Joe Biden. They all had all of the benefits of American due process and were either convicted or pled guilty through the proper legal process. They were not political prisoners. They were not in any way treated unfairly. This is the mythology that Donald Trump is trying to perpetrate. And while he claims to be the great champion of the blue of the police, he pardoned all of those who engaged in violent terrorism against the way outnumbered Capitol Police trying to defend our democracy.
There's no doubt he has one objective, and is to whitewash that entire day. It's clear as day.
Yes.
That's his aim.
To his benefit, as I said, you control the past narrative, you control the future.
It's not going to last. I mean, 10, 15 years, this is not going to hold. People are going to look back in history and see the horrific day that it was and know that without Trump, none of that would have happened.
Completely agree, but Trump doesn't care about 10 to 15 years.
True.
He only cares about the next few years, presuming, that he survives, with his competency intact over the next few years. This is a very useful narrative for Donald Trump to justify whatever he does. He did the same thing with the pardon of the notorious drug dealer, former President Hernandez of Guatemala, one of the worst drug dealers in history.
Wasn't it Honduras?
Honduras, I'm sorry, you're right. Responsible for hundreds of tons of cocaine being funneled into the United States. Was he denied due process, Sam?
No.
No. He also had all the benefits of due process. But Trump said the same thing to try to justify his pardon of Hernandez. Oh, he was treated very unfairly. He was denied due process. Absolute, abject nonsense. But, if he can rewrite the history of January 6th, that becomes a useful element to justify all the awful things he's doing subsequent to that.
Let's move on to the big news right now, which is Venezuela. The Trump administration claims it now, quote, runs Venezuela, Dad, even though Maduro's vice president has been sworn in as the new president alongside a delegation of Iran, Russia, and China, not exactly U.S.-friendly allies. Meanwhile, Maduro has pleaded not guilty to charges here in the United States. The Trump administration is calling their actions in Venezuela both a, quote, military operation and a law enforcement mission. Either way you paint it, Dad, these actions are illegal, right?
Illegal, immoral, and incredibly unwise. They're only going to make things worse. How do I know that?
Tell me.
Because of the history of American foreign interventions to overthrow established governments. Whoever bad they may be, that's not the issue. What happened in Iraq, Sam, after we overturned the horrible dictator Saddam Hussein?
A massive power vacuum and violence,
civil war,
violence,
instability. It's still not a stable, functioning democratic state. what happened after we overturned the horrible dictator Gaddafi in Libya. Violence, chaos, instability. Another failed state. In Chile, we overturned not a terrible dictator, a left-wing elected leader, Allende, in a coup supported by the United States. And what did we get? Pinochet, one of the worst, most brutal dictators in the history of Latin America. We overturned a democratically elected government in Guatemala. And again, we got a dictator, we got instability, and we got genocide against the Mayan people in Guatemala. We overturned the Taliban in Afghanistan. And what happened after that, Sam?
They're back.
Back after 20 years of absolutely futile warfare. The history of America coming in and overturning established governments, whether they're good or bad, is absolutely disastrous. When we overturned the government of Iran, we got the Shah, another dictator, which ultimately led to the Islamic Revolution and the Iran hostage crisis. And this, in many ways, is worse than any of those because obviously it's crystal clear that beyond smash and grab in Venezuela, what plan do they have for actually running the country?
They don't have it. They don't run. I mean, this is the thing that has come to my mind in the last couple of days. People are talking about regime change. It's the same regime.
And maybe worse.
Right. This is Maduro's regime just being run by his vice president. Like I said, when she was sworn in, there was a delegation from Iran, Russia, and China.
Yes.
In what way are we running this country? The people are going, oh, there's no plan. It doesn't even exist. There's not even a plan to be had. The country is being run still by Maduro's regime.
And in a sense, it's worse because they're cracking down even more than they did before the American incursion. They're really brutalizing those who they think are complicit in the American attack on Venezuela. This notion that Pete Hegseth and Marco Rubio are running Venezuela, it has about as much validity as the idea that January 6th was a patriotic day of love.
And Trump has seemed to reject Machado, who is in exile right now, the winner of the Nobel Peace Prize. He seemed to totally reject her as a possible replacement for the
or her party, which won supposedly, if the election was conducted fairly, the last election. There's a simple reason. You know why he's rejected her and her party.
Tell me.
He does not want a free democratic government in Venezuela. He wants puppets. He wants those who have no principles and might be willing to deal with the devil, Donald Trump. Machado might not be willing to deal with the devil, Donald Trump, or give up
It's hard to
her
tell.
oil.
It's hard to tell. She's been publicly really sucking up to Trump a lot.
Well, she has to.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, she has no choice because he, holds her fate in his hands. How many times did he talk about democracy in describing what they're doing in Venezuela?
Not at all.
And how many times did he talk about oil?
Pretty much entirely.
Yes. It's pretty clear this is smash and grab.
Now, what do you think about this terminology, quote, military operation and a, quote, law enforcement mission? It's a bunch of gobbledygook, right?
It's total gobbledygook. And who does it sound like? Special operation. Vladimir Putin and his justification for going into Ukraine. Remember, he said, this is not an invasion. This is not war. It's a special operation designed to deal with the corrupt Nazi-type government of Ukraine. Change the words a little bit.
Yeah,
and
shit.
It's pretty much
yeah, it sounds almost identical to Putin.
Yes.
And I'm sorry, but the idea that this is a military operation, you go into a country, bomb it, remove their leader,
kill
and then
people,
claim you now run it. That's an act of war.
Of course it's an act of war.
Operation. A bunch of nonsense.
They had a meeting of the UN Security Council, and America's staunchest allies, or NATO allies, either openly condemned what Trump was doing, like Spain and Denmark and France, or like Britain, kind of hedged, but none of them supported it. Other Latin American nations like Brazil and Colombia denounced it. Virtually no nation, none of our allies in NATO came out and supported it, and quite a number of them openly condemned it. And here's the UN Secretary General, who warned about the American operation in Venezuela. He said, "I am deeply concerned about the possible intensification of instability in the country, the potential impact on the region, and the precedent it may set for how relations between and among states are conducted." You know what he's driving at there when he says how relations among states are conducted? Driving at dictatorships invading other countries on the same pretext that Trump used, most notably possibly Russia trying to abduct Zelensky, right? And China invading Taiwan, claiming, Taiwan is legitimately part of China and is an illegitimate state, and therefore we have a total justification to invade there. There can be zero doubt that when you bomb a country, extract its leader, kill people, and then claim you're running the country as a result of that attack, that is an act of war. Period. Full stop. Just as much as Putin's attack on Ukraine was an act of war.
Let me ask you a question about this, the whole oil thing. Now, obviously, Trump has mentioned oil a lot. We know that Venezuela is very oil rich. But there's been reports that a lot of the big companies are saying they don't want to have anything to do with oil in Venezuela.
Yeah, it's very strange.
It is a little weird.
Look, once again, think about this. Trump has not fully thought through what he's doing here. Yes, he wants to grab the oil, and I'm sure a lot of his cronies have financial interests. His own company rather, it's not a corporation, may or may not have financial interests in the long run. At the beginning of his campaign, he told the oil companies, "You finance me, I'll let you do what you want." But it's clear he hasn't thought this through, because the big oil companies are very reluctant to go in and really start from ground zero in revitalizing the oil industry in a country marked by political instability and uncertainty. If there's one thing big business likes, Sam, it's stability and certainty.
Yeah, the whole oil thing has already gotten really confusing because, like we said, there's reports that the companies aren't interested in going into Venezuela, and then Trump reportedly said that the government will give these companies subsidies to go into Venezuela, and then tonight Trump had some Truth Social post that said Venezuela has already agreed to give us 50 billion barrels of oil. It's all confusing to me.
It's a huge mess, but that's why Trump is perfectly happy to deal with the ongoing brutal dictatorship in Venezuela. This intervention has zero to do with democracy, with protecting human life, with human rights. It has everything to do with his efforts to plunder Venezuela. And if the horrible continuing Maduro government is the best way to do that, that's absolutely fine with Donald Trump.
Let's move on to another part of Trump's imperialistic goals. European leaders are pushing back after Trump again floated the idea of a U.S. takeover of Greenland, with Denmark warning the remarks undermine NATO unity.
This is astounding. Donald Trump also tried to justify the assault on Venezuela with the Monroe Doctrine, which has nothing to do with it. The Monroe Doctrine was designed to keep European powers out of the hemisphere. This was an attack on a hemispheric nation. And whether or not you think Maduro was fairly elected or not is another issue, not one for the United States to unilaterally decide anyway. But here's the thing. Trump has now somehow expanded the Monroe Doctrine. What did he call it? The Dondro Doctrine or something absurd like that. Basically to say we can do anything we want in Latin America. You know, kind of an expanded version on steroids of Theodore Roosevelt's Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. But it has nothing to do with the original Monroe Doctrine. What it has everything to do with, this is an extension of what Donald Trump has said anyway. As president, I can do anything that I want. There are no constraints on me. And this, you know, talk about trying to even militarily take over Greenland, you know, takes this aggression to yet another level. You know, Greenland is not in the Western Hemisphere, right?
Well,
not exactly. It's not part of Latin America anyway. And Trump's Dondero Doctrine wouldn't apply here. And then you look at the guy behind all this. It's as much Stephen Miller as it is Donald Trump. And he was interviewed and basically said the United States had as much claim to Greenland as Denmark did. What's the basis for an American claim to Greenland?
I have no idea.
None. The relationship between Denmark and Greenland goes back centuries. It became a Danish colony in the 18th century, many hundred years ago. It became integrated into Denmark in 1953, part of Denmark. In 1979, it was given home rule, and in 2009, self-government, with limitations allowing Greenland to manage its own affairs. So for hundreds of years, through various stages, it's had this relationship with Denmark, much like, Puerto Rico or American Samoa has had with the United States. What relationship has it had with the U.S. during this time?
I think we've had some bases there, but we have
bases all over the place.
Right, but we've actually reduced our bases over time in Greenland from what I've heard.
But having bases there don't give us, any legal authority to control Greenland. We have bases all over the world.
True.
Bases in Japan, but we don't control Japan. Stephen Miller, it's so absurd that it almost seems silly to have to refute it. It's we are talking about, being caught in a Salvatore Dali, surreal painting. That's what's really going on with this administration.
What do you think tangibly they're going to do? It seems unlikely that they're going to, do anything militarily. Are we just going to walk in and plant a U.S. flag? I mean, the Greenland thing seems sort of very abstract and less concrete than Venezuela, for example. And that's not even that concrete.
Well,
so
we're talking about a NATO ally.
Right.
In Denmark. Denmark has said if you, militarily go after Greenland, it's the death of NATO. Because under, the NATO charter, attack on one nation is an attack on all, and they're all supposed to come to its defense. So does that mean all other nations would have to come to the defense of Denmark against the United States?
Yes.
It's so crazy.
Right, it's a mess.
It is so crazy. And the other thing that, some of the experts on this part of the world have pointed out, Greenland would give anything the United States wants. You want more bases? Sure. But as you say, they're cutting down on bases. You want mineral deals? We'll make mineral deals with you. There's absolutely no reason why the United States needs to take over Greenland.
Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, former VP candidate under Kamala Harris, has dropped out of his state's gubernatorial race. Walz was facing a potentially tough re-election fight as Republicans sought to tie him to a federal probe into a massive welfare fraud scandal in the state. Senator Amy Klobuchar is considering entering the contest.
As you know, I was never a Tim Walz fan. I thought he was a bad pick for vice president. I was for Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania, a critical state. He's from Minnesota, not a state in play. A bad debater, not a charismatic figure, not especially knowledgeable. I have no idea, if he's involved in this alleged welfare fraud scandal in Minnesota, but the optics are terrible. And he probably would not have been able to get reelected. Amy Klobuchar would be a very strong candidate, but that would open up a Democratic seat, not something in the Senate, not something the Democrats want.
Right, but it's in Minnesota, so it's a probably pretty safe blue seat.
Probably, but you never want to have an open seat if you can avoid it.
Yeah, I haven't really been following this Minnesota welfare fraud scandal. At first it seemed like it was sort of this right-wing online sort of
it started
theory.
That way. Yeah.
And then maybe it seemed real. And then I thought it was quickly disproven, but then Walz drops out. So now I'm like, oh, maybe it wasn't disproven.
Nobody knows.
I'm not exactly sure.
There's not been any due process. It's just been allegations. And of course, Trump, who has pardoned some of the worst, most notorious fraudsters in modern American history, depriving their victims of restitution, is suddenly all over this alleged, not proven fraud. You know why?
Tell me.
Black people.
Right, Somalians.
Exactly.
Trump has targeted Minnesota
that he cares
and Somalians
about.
For sure.
Fraud by black people. Fraud by white people, no problem.
But you always say that VP picks don't matter.
Yeah. I'm not saying he made a difference in the election. I just didn't like the pick. That's all.
Yeah, I don't remember being crazy about the pick either. I think maybe Harris was scared of Shapiro because of the Israel-Palestine conflict, and she thought that he was too pro-Israel and might scare away people on the far left, but I don't know. I don't think people on the far left...
playing not to lose again,
Yeah. I don't think people on the far left really supported Harris that much anyways.
They
so
didn't.
Yeah, it does seem like, obviously, hindsight is 2020, but it does, in hindsight, seem kind of crazy that she didn't pick a VP from a swing state. Obviously, she lost...
It's not hindsight. We were right on that right away. I was a very strong advocate for Shapiro and was very negative about the Walz pick.
Yeah, obviously now, in 2026, we know she lost every swing state.
Right.
So it's like,
I don't know.
Holy moly.
I don't think it would have made a difference, but nonetheless, stop playing not to lose.
Right. The Pentagon will begin a review of the, quote, effectiveness of women serving in ground combat roles, reopening a long settled military policy debate.
Not settled for Hegseth. He is on record when he was a commentator and saying women should not be in combat. I can't prove it. We don't know. But I do think this review is a smokescreen for eliminating the role of women in combat. I don't think it's, knowing what I know about Hegseth, I don't think it's a good faith review of what's going on.
Speaking of stuff that's been buried by the Venezuela stuff, the Epstein files, the Justice Department says it has released less than 1% of its Epstein files and is still reviewing more than 2 million documents.
This is a travesty. They were supposed to produce it within 30 days. What was that deadline, Sam? Something like the 19th?
19th of December.
December, so, more than 2 weeks ago. And they're not close. It's going to be months, maybe years before they produce it. And they have no excuse. Way back in the campaign, Trump said, I want those Epstein files released. They could have started January 20th, 21st to go through them and release them. And, it was months ago that Bondi said, all these files are on my desk. Remember that?
Oh, my God.
Yeah. And, we're ready to release. Then she said, oh, no, there are no files. I think it's a combination of the lazy, the stupid, and the malicious.
Right.
All combined to create this fiasco. And I'm not sure it helps Trump and the Republicans to have this drag out over weeks and months right up to the 2026 midterms.
Yeah, I hear that. It sort of does and it doesn't, right?
I know. It's unclear. But it is such a mess. You know, they are, as I said, a combination of the lazy, the stupid, and the malicious.
Back to the Pentagon, Senator Mark Kelly is pushing back after Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth threatened his military rank and retirement pay. Senator Kelly said that Hegseth and the Trump administration were attempting to stifle free speech and dissent among retired military officers. If you remember, Senator Mark Kelly was part of a video telling or reminding troops that they don't have to follow illegal orders.
Which is part of the military code.
Right.
They weren't making that up. That is part of the military code. And guess who back in 2016 said exactly the same thing? Is right on video. Hegseth. And now, again, hypocrisy is not a strong enough word. We need a better word to describe these people. But again, I think this backfires. All this does is make Kelly more prominent. You know, he was pretty unknown, but now, you know, his name recognition, his renown is vastly greater than it was before. And none of this is going to stick. They're not going to get rid of his pension for telling the truth, saying the same thing Hegseth did. You know, again, you know, they're so overbearing. They're so heavy-handed that, you know, sometimes it backlashes.
The Trump administration is halting $10 billion in social services that funds 5 Democratic-led states following allegations of fraud. Now, this sort of ties back to the walls thing because Minnesota is part of it. There seems to be this push within the Trump administration to claim that a lot of these blue states, people are stealing social services funds. Obviously, pretty big allegations. I'm not sure how much evidence they provided of this, but apparently they're trying to halt this money.
Yeah, and of course they're targeting Democrats, just like they targeted James Comey and Letitia James. And in the Epstein files, they only instructed Bondi to investigate Democrats. This is just part of Trump using our government, the people's government, for his own grievances and for his own revenge. It is just, you know, appalling. Instead of representing the people of the country, he represents himself and his interests.
All right. With that, we will go to our question portion of the show.
First, a drink.
First, my dad needs a drink. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. If you're watching, you haven't liked the stream yet, please like it. We have almost 1,000 people watching, but only 300 likes. The likes really help the stream do well. Become a member or donate to get in line to ask this guy a question. Thank you to George Politis for your
one of our good friends.
$80 Australian donation. We appreciate that. This is from one of our members, Edith Russo. They say, can you explain BRICS and how it may be the reason for Maduro's capture?
I'm not sure what BRICS is.
Brazil, Russia, Iran, China, South Africa, sort of an alliance of those nations.
Alliance of supposed left-wing nations that, yeah, I know what it is. Yeah, these are the same nations that have come out very strongly and criticized what Trump is doing in Venezuela, and nations that he would like to destabilize. After all, he has tried to exclude the government of South Africa from international meetings. He has launched a military attack against Iran and now launched a military attack against Venezuela. It's kind of a poor man's version of what George W. Bush once called the axis of evil, which really were evil places.
This is from Dave. They say, from all appearances, Trump may move to take action on another country. Our Congress is compromised. What do you see coming as possible moves?
He has, again, you got to put Venezuela in context. According to what we hear from Stephen Miller and Donald Trump, it's not a one-off. It's not an isolated incident. They have threatened to move against Colombia, Cuba, and, of course, astonishingly, Greenland. So this is part of a whole smash and grab policy on the part of this administration. And whether or not they carry it out, who knows? You know, I'm sure Trump himself doesn't know. Maybe Stephen Miller thinks he knows, but certainly additional military aggression is quite possible.
People are correcting me. BRICS, the I in BRICS is India, not Iran. Apologies for that. This is from member Mr. Showbar. They say, after the invasion of Iraq, U.S. monetary aid was pipelined into Iraq on an expedited schedule to attempt to salvage a deteriorating social situation. The same thing might happen here in Venezuela. The oil companies are not going to fund infrastructure repairs. Do you see the same thing happening here in Venezuela? Will Congress actually approve this type of money? Will oil companies invest in Venezuela if the political situation is unsettled?
Yeah, we talked about that. You know, they're not likely to invest in an unsettled, unstable political situation. And Trump has talked about subsidizing. Imagine that. We're cutting Medicaid. We're cutting food stamps to the most needy and most vulnerable of Americans. And we're talking about subsidizing with our taxpayer dollars some of the richest corporations in the world. Just think about how astounding that is. And Trump would not hesitate for one moment to allocate whatever funds were necessary to big oil. I'm not certain Congress, even a narrow Republican Congress, and one of the Republicans in Congress just passed away, and I think that's reduced their margin to 5, 218 to 213, so they can only afford to lose 2. So I'm not sure if even this Congress would approve it, and certainly if Democrats, as is likely, take back the House in 2026, zero chance of approving that.
This is from member Sandra Russell. They say, I remember watching the draft for the Vietnam War. What effect do you think educating the public about this method of staffing the military would have on public opinion of current military actions? Do you see it possibly being used again?
I'd be shocked if we reinstated the draft once more. You know, it hasn't been in effect since the Nixon administration, and it would be incredibly unpopular for a government, a president, and Congress to reinstate the draft. I do understand, you know, I was drafted myself in 1969, the effect it had on galvanizing opposition to the war, but that alone would not be justification for the enormous political risk of reinstating the draft.
We have over 1,000 people watching, 400 likes. Make sure you like the stream if you haven't yet. It really helps us out a lot. A $10 donation from Jim Blowers. They say, does Trump's Venezuela action mean that the world may be running out of oil, that peak oil has been reached? Why invade a nation if there were easier ways of getting oil?
Very good point. The United States has plenty of oil. As I understand it, we're a net exporter of oil. Now, the Venezuelan oil is a particular kind of heavy oil, but we do not need Venezuela's oil. It's not like we're desperate to get that oil. And there is no sign in the near term that we're running out of oil. And, of course, the worst thing we can do is increase our reliance on fossil fuels like oil. You know, scientists have told us that we are getting close to a tipping point on climate. You know, there have been all kinds of flooding and fires and tornadoes and bomb cyclones. Glaciers are melting. Icebergs are breaking off. Wildlife is suffering. And yet the administration wants to bury its head in the sand, erase even a mention of climate change, and promote the horrific expansion of the burning of fossil fuels, which is the last thing humanity needs.
This is from member Wyatt Hamilton. They say, with the Stephen Miller thing about running Venezuela, is there parallels with Paul Bremer, who governed U.S.-occupied Iraq, with Stephen Miller, when he's in charge of Venezuela, ratcheting up to the extreme with Miller? Sorry, that was...
Yeah, he'd be the last person you want running. When they had this Viceroy Bremer running Iraq, it was a disaster. Not surprisingly, you can't just bring in these outsiders and say they're going to run a country. You know how many people are in Venezuela, Sam?
Can I guess?
Guess.
I would guess 65 million.
Not that much, but close to 30 million. It's not a tiny country, and it's a pretty large land area. The idea that someone as incompetent and immoral as Stephen Miller could somehow run Venezuela is worse than an illusion. And the Iraq example is a very important cautionary tale.
Member Darth Hadius says, what's it going to take for legitimate political opposition to Trump? We have establishment Dems who can't accept they are the last thing people want to hear after the cash grabs of Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, but also new progressives who have been demonized as communists by the GOP.
You know, I'm going to go back to a historical precedent for you. Harry Truman, in 1948, was demonized by the opposition as a communist, even though there was someone actually running to his left, Henry Wallace. But he was demonized as a socialist, a communist, a left-winger, and he was written off. Every pollster, every pundit said Harry Truman was finished, he was going to lose. And he disregarded all of that. And what he did was run, maybe even to this day, the most vigorous grassroots campaign. Harry Truman's Whistle Stop campaign, where he took a train all over the country, stopping everywhere, giving speeches from the back, from the caboose of the train, and directly going after the Republicans, going after the do-nothing Congress. Think about that. And advocating openly progressive policies that helped people, like health reform, like housing, like civil rights, like infrastructure construction. And I've said this so many times, Democrats don't need to run away from their record. If you look at 90% of the federal initiatives that have helped people, Social Security, Fair Labor Standards, Medicare, Medicaid, the Civil Rights Act, the Affordable Care Act, they've all been done by Democrats. And this notion that Democrats are somehow this elite, who don't have the interests of ordinary people in mind is a myth that the Democrats have let the Republicans get away with. We need a lot more of Harry Truman today.
We're almost at 500 likes. Don't forget to like the stream.
All right.
This is from Ishan Belmont. They say, in U.S. history class, you learn about the horrors of the past, like poor health standards, bad living conditions, etc. The actions of U.S. presidents of the past, like Andrew Jackson, Trail of Tears, Polk, Manifest Destiny, Taking Mexican Land. Would you say Trump's antics are pretty much at the same level of these past presidents or others?
Absolutely. Andrew Jackson had horrific policies towards indigenous people, responsible for sending the settled civilized tribes in the East on this awful trail of tears, which created suffering, death, and basically sending them out to land, which at the time the white settlers didn't want. And of course, Polk engineered the Mexican War, which is a horrific racist war, but it did have the result of almost doubling the size of the U.S., giving us California and much of the American Southwest as well. There's no such silver lining to anything Trump is doing.
This is from member Nikki Wan. They say, Why aren't Democrats highlighting the student loan garnishments? Seems like they should be all over this topic.
I completely agree. It's another example of a program by Democrats that's helped everyday Americans, people trying to better themselves with a college education. And for no good reason, it's been spiked by the Trump administration. You want to crack down on students, a lot of them who were defrauded by these play-for-pay colleges, but were perfectly happy to give untold billions of dollars to the wealthiest corporations.
This is a $10 donation from the Mad Hatter Forever. They say, what are the chances of a large coalition of countries, including our allies, imposing sanctions on the U.S. as it happened with Russia, and could that have a devastating effect on the global economy?
It would have a devastating effect on the global economy, which is why it's not going to happen. Look, Trump says, we're now respected around the world. We are now hated around the world. At least the Trump administration is hated around the world, including by some of our staunchest allies. But they have to walk a bit of a tightrope, right, Sam?
Yes.
Who's the most powerful person in the world?
Trump.
What's the most powerful nation in the world?
USA.
What's the largest economy in the world?
USA.
So they have to be careful. It's very difficult to go up directly against the United States without severe consequences, like the questioner has pointed out.
This is from member DSW964. They say, what do you think? What are the odds? What odds do you give for Trump actually remaining in power until the end of his term? Interested if you can see a cascade of domestic/international policy scandals and violations, and the law unraveling his grip on the presidency in the years ahead.
I think his grip is unraveling a bit. Usually when there's American military action in the short term, there's a rally around the flag. Even the Iraq War, however controversial it is, in the short run did have majority public support. This aggression against Venezuela has less than 40% report. A couple of polls I saw had those favoring it at 33% or 39%. Plus, over 70% do not want the United States to essentially run the nation of Venezuela. Over 70%. So we're not getting the kind of rally around the flag that you normally get with a military operation. And I don't think Trump might get impeached, but I don't think he'll ever be convicted by the Senate. But I think the more likely threat to his serving out another 3+ years is his health.
We're almost at 600 likes.
All right.
Like the stream, subscribe if you're not subscribed. If you're watching after the live on the recorded version, don't forget to throw a like. Don't forget to subscribe if you're not subscribed. This is from member Dirty Your Dog. They say, Professor, how do you think future Americans will view Trump given being reelected after January 6th? Is there any comparable controversy where a past president still got reelected?
Very, very difficult. Most big scandals in American history did not involve the reelection. The Grant scandals, the Great Barbecue, the selling essentially of the government was in his second term. The Teapot Dome scandal, Warren Harding died in the midst of the Teapot Dome scandal. Harry Truman's mess in Washington, kind of minor scandal, again, was in his second term. The Watergate scandal was in Nixon's second term, and the Iran-Contra scandal was in Ronald Reagan's second term. So there really isn't a clear analog to what happened with Donald Trump.
Today is January 6th, as we know. What is the psychology behind Republicans' obsession with conspiracy theories?
I'm not a psychologist, so I'm not necessarily the best person to answer that. But I know a lot about conspiracy theories in general. They are very satisfying for two reasons. One, they provide explanations where other things might not be clear. And two, they always blame someone else. It's always the other that is the target of these conspiracy theories. So it enables the right wingers. It's not us. It's someone else. It's those immigrants, those dangerous black people, those feminists, those deranged left-wingers, the Jews. It's always someone else. It's a funny joke. I was going to tell Sam this. Way back during the era of the pogroms in the early 20th century, and the Weimar Republic in the 30s, a Jew saw his rabbi reading this rabid pro-Nazi paper. And he says, "Why in the world would you read that?" He says, "Well, when I read the regular news, I hear about all these murders of the Jews, about the pogroms, about the attacks. But when I read this right-wing stuff, I hear that the Jews control everything. They run the entertainment. They run the industries. They run the finance. They're about to take over the world." See how positive it is?
That's pretty funny. That's a good one. Someone in the chat said, weren't we supposed to do the 26 predictions today? We were, but there was just so much happening in the news. Tomorrow, that will be published as a standalone video. We recorded that today. So look out for that tomorrow. Published tomorrow as a standalone video.
We did it. And, we still welcome your donations and your membership. They help us keep going. Definitely.
Michelle and Philip just donated some memberships.
Nice.
Not memberships. They donated some money. Michelle says, if the Supreme Court guts the Voting Rights Act, I believe we can say goodbye to democracy. Your thoughts, Professor?
Well, I'm not sure I'd go quite to that extreme, but it would certainly be a body blow to democracy. The Voting Rights Act. Ronald Reagan, was he a lunatic liberal, Sam?
Yes.
Of course he was. By today's standards, maybe so. He called the Voting Rights Act the crown jewel of American law, because after a century of Jim Crow, preceded by many centuries of slavery, for the first time, the Voting Rights Act gave African Americans and later other discriminated against minorities an opportunity to register, to vote, and to elect candidates of their choice. It would be a tragic reversion to a discredited early era to destroy the Voting Rights Act.
I agree. All right. It is 9:53, so we got time for a few more questions. This is from member Sarah Dancer. They say, what is Congress doing to prevent another insurrection?
Nothing. Zero. The Republicans in Congress have bought into the Trump mythology that it wasn't an insurrection at all, but was a patriotic act to save our democracy. War is peace. Famine is plenty. Hate is love.
Right. This is a $5 donation, Canadian.
I take that back.
Oh, wow.
I mean, the current Congress is doing nothing, but the previous Congress had passed a revision of the legislation attempting to control and govern what happens in a contested situation in the vote count. So there had been a revision of the 19th century legislation. Very few people are aware of that. That was quite positive.
$5 Canadian from Limpetark 98K. They say, do you think you will cover the 26th Quebec election? What do you think? Maybe
now
we'll
that you've alerted us to it.
Alert.
Yeah, we'll see how significant it is.
When are they? I have no idea.
I've been to Quebec a number of times. I love it.
You love it?
Yes.
Oh, nice. Let's see our next question. This is a $10 donation from Toyota Corolla. They say, if Trump goes after Greenland, I think we in California should have a right to vote on joining Denmark. In all seriousness, though, I have family in Europe, and we are all terrified about the madman in the Oval Office.
You should be. And, the governments, our allies in Europe, even though they've got to be really careful, have, I think, more strongly than ever before since the formation of NATO back in 1949, denounced an action on the part of the United States. That's a rift in the NATO alliance that we've not seen before, even with Vietnam.
I see DSW964 in the chat. They say, I'm late. Hope I didn't miss the answer to my question. You did, in fact. We just answered your question a few minutes ago. But the good news is this will be recorded and saved on YouTube, so you can always go back and watch. This is from Sean Matthew. They say, Hugo Chavez used oil wealth to fund massive social programs, but Venezuela's economy later collapsed. How much of that collapse is because of his policies, and how much is due to what came after him?
Oh, boy.
Both.
Chavez's policies did contribute to the diminution of the oil production, to the loss of wealth, and to the kind of anti-democratic crackdown that is inimical to a prosperous society. And then, of course, Maduro, after him, accelerated that.
Let's see here. Other than the Trump doctrine, what legislation does the president have for, quote, regime change? Does the public still support regime change the same way it did during Truman's presidency?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not.
I told you over 70% in the most recent poll says the United States should not be involved in the governing of Venezuela after the bombing and the kidnapping. And that includes quite a number of people who supported bringing Maduro to trial, but do not support continuing American operations in running Venezuela. There's almost no support for that.
Is Venezuelan oil really viable? We sort of touched on this earlier. I've heard it will take 10 years to actually get it from the ground.
I've heard that too.
And then it has to be refined.
Yes.
Maybe it's just Trump being a power bully, and it's not even about the oil.
Who knows with Trump? You're absolutely right. It's heavy oil. It's difficult to deal with, difficult to extract, but we do have refineries in the U.S. that can deal with it. And I've heard, I'm not an oil expert, but I've heard those who claim to be saying anywhere from 2 to 10 years.
Yeah, I mean,
if ever.
Yeah, it's hard to judge right now what's happening. It's all so new and so fresh. As time passes, I think the real motives will set. We'll know exactly why he did this. Honestly, there's part of me that thinks they're just going to sort of abandon Venezuela in a couple weeks.
I agree with that. And I think he's perfectly happy to have the remnants of the Maduro regime governing Venezuela, because they are perhaps more likely to be transactional than a true people's democracy.
Someone just said oil isn't the motive. Much like Yeltsin and Chechen, Trump is doing this to boost his low approval ratings.
I'm not sure this boosts his low approval ratings. It might slightly, but to the extent it does, there's a very minuscule rally around the flag. Nothing like what we've seen previously. Plus, this distracts from a whole host of other problems, right, Sam?
Yeah.
The Epstein files, the Jack Smith testimony, the continuing high prices, the tragedy of the healthcare premiums, the stagnant job market. He's got so many troubles at home. There's a famous movie called Wag the Dog, in which they kind of fabricate a war to distract from troubles at home. Well, there is something to be said for the wagging the dog here.
No doubt. Okay, with that, we will wrap up Lichtman Live for this evening. I want to give some shout outs to some donators. Limited Light, Free Throw Guy, Comic Fan. Thank you all who have donated. Thank you to all of our members. And thank you to everybody who's watching. We greatly appreciate you. Remember to stay tuned or look out tomorrow. His 2026 prediction video is coming out tomorrow as a standalone video. Get excited. Like it. Share it. Watch it. That would be awesome.
And not only will that video have my 2026 predictions, it'll have Sam's fact check on my 2025 predictions.
Yeah.
You know, what was my track record there? Mm-hmm. So watch out for that.
Watch out.
Watch out, and we'll see you on Thursday and try to keep you apprised of the craziness that's going on in our country and around the world, and keep it in the broader historical perspective.
Dark Pepsi in the chat just said, I do like the show.
All right.
There you go. Do you have any final words to the people, or is that was your final words to the people?
Stay tuned. This, as Sam says, it's not even the beginning. It's the beginning of the beginning.
Right. Good night.
Good night.